Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, the organizer, for letting me talk today here in this forum. Everything started for me 2 months ago when I was supposed to start a course on master level in anthropology, which I have been given in more than 10 years. So it was nothing new about that course for me. But one day before the start of the course, I realized that I couldn't teach that course. I realized that I could not teach that course because the world was not the same as it was the year before. I knew that if I repeat the course this year, as I did last year, I would betray academia. I would betray my students. I would betray myself. So I wrote again a new introduction for the course. And the course was not the same. It became something else. Some of my students are here. I hope they are happy with that course. So, and I started thinking about what is teaching, who I am as an educator, what is I'm doing after 27 years teaching at this university, what I'm doing, what I'm supposed to do, what is pedagogy for me, what is pedagogy for this day. And I started that course with a question by American Mojave indigenous poet, Natalie Diaz. Natalie Diaz who asked, what language do we need to live right now? And my question was, what knowledge do we need to live right now in this time, shrouded in a dark conjecture? So let me first explain what I mean with these terms, yeah? First, conjecture. Conjecture is Gramscian term, and it's about a historical moment, a moment when different forces get together, a breaking point of various historical events to shape a new political form. And this is what we see. This is the dark conjecture we are living through today. A conjecture of different disasters, from Ukraine to Palestine, from environmental disasters to mass displacement of people, let alone talking about growing poverty and more. So what pedagogy is needed to address this dark conjecture? And following Gramsci, Stuart Hall also saw conjecture as a period during which different social, political, economic, and ideological contradictions in society come together to give it a specific and distinctive shape. So, is it only temporary, short-lived crisis we see today? Or as Gramsci would say, it is an organic, it is an inherent consequence of immanent contradictions in racial capitalism and nation-state system, and how this organic crisis have changed the history forever. As Gramsci, as Stuart Hall put it, say, when a conjecture unrolls, there is no going back. History shifts gears. And this is what we see. The war in Palestine is not a short war. It will change the history forever. It will change geopolitics forever. The same we can say for Ukraine, yeah? It is changing the world. So what kind of pedagogy is needed when the history is changing? A pedagogy would not be politically responsible and intellectually honest unless addressing the present conjectures. So the questions addressing, not necessarily answering this question, but asking this question with students are how a society is possible. What does solidarity mean today? What does care mean today? What does security mean today? What does love mean today? What does education mean today? What kind of educator am I? What kind of educator should I be? My job is not to reproduce or repeat what the state produces. My job is not to consolidate authority, but to question it. This is my function. This is my responsibility and obligation towards people who pay my salary, taxpayers. My responsibility to my students is to cultivate and promote thinking, not banking them with knowledge, as Paulo Freire put it. Cultivate and promote thinking in spaces between knowledge and power, knowing and thinking, thought and action, theory and practice, and academia and the public sphere. So what is darkness? Darkness, thinking in dark time, coming from title of a book written by Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt was inspired by a poem by Bertolt Brecht, her friend. And both of them lived through horrible times, yeah? But dark time, both of them, they didn't, I mean, Hannah Arendt didn't mean dark time to refer to disasters. Darkness for her was not the disasters themselves, but rather how disasters were addressed. How people talk about disasters, but disasters remain hidden. How things appears differently in public debates. This is darkness we face today when Trump say we build the wall and that is an act of love. We see that darkness when Swedish minister says ceasefire means injustice. How can ceasefire be injustice? This darkness that something appears as something else, is it exactly the threat for free thinking, for critical thinking? And this is our responsibility in academia to face it, to counter it. Characteristic for darkness, for dark time, is silence. Silence leads to absurdity. The word absurd in Latin is absurdus, which means not to be heard of. And as Albert Camus said, the absurd is born of the confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. Silence is desired and promoted by people in power because it preserves their privileges. Silence promotes order and negates justice. Silence protects privilege of oppressors through rejection of justice for the oppressed people. One of the synonyms for silence is peace. Martin Luther King wrote in his letter, famous letter from Birmingham jail in mid-1960s or early 1960s, he made a distinction between negative peace, which is absence of tensions, and positive peace, which is the presence of justice. And he believed, he wrote, that the main barrier for justice for Black Americans were not Ku Klux Klans or racist groups, but silent white people, white Americans, who preferred a negative peace. They preferred order, not justice. Silence and stillness are in the oppressor's imaginaries. This is peacefulness, the signs of peacefulness. And the danger of this imaginary is that silence and darkness become normalized. So the question we should ask right now in this classroom and every classroom, every single day is, what is our response? And you know, response is related to responsibility. They are same related to words. What is the responsibility of an educator in the time of dark conjecture? And another word in the title is fugitivity. Fugitivity, and fugitive is a person who is running away from the hostile institutions and situations. Fugitive is an outlaw, a person who is hiding from hostile law. Fugitivity is a response to captivity. And historically, we know that the term is coming from enslaved peoples resistant to slavery, resistant to its dehumanization, resistant to its racial capitalism. Fugitivity is an act of liberation, not only from the brutal material condition of slavery, but also from the image of being imposed on the enslaved people by racist ideology. Fugitivity is about escaping, but also refusal. Enslaved people learn in secret how to read and write, and it was beginning of emancipation. Frederick Douglass, the most important leader of movement of African-American civil rights in the 19th century, started to learn reading and writing. His owner, when he discovered that, he forbade that and said, if he learns to read and write, there will be no keeping him. And despite all dangers, Douglass gained literacy and could write free passes for himself and others to escape. It was 1835. So in the context of Black fugitivity, literacy was not only a conceptual, but emancipatory knowledge. Tina Camp is an African-American scholar in visual culture. She wrote, the concept of fugitivity highlights in the tension between acts or flights of escape and creative practice of refusal, practices that undermine the category of the dominant. So this refusal aspect of fugitivity is the process of self, as Bell Hooks put it, self-actualization. The slave owner who said that if Douglass learns to read and write, I quote the owner, it would forever unfit him to be a slave. He would once become unmanageable and for no value for his master. And he continued, he will want to know how to write and to read, and he will be running away with himself. the end of quote. So this running away with himself is exactly that self-actualization, that act of refusal I'm talking about. Anti-literacy laws criminalize Black learning. And this is how fugitive pedagogy is coming in. And this fugitive pedagogy is continuing, has continued since then. Throughout the Jim Crow to this day, mass attack on critical race theory in United States and Europe is the most recent example of that, and how educational institutions have become hostile toward non-white students and non-white scholars. The state of Florida, perhaps, is the most extreme part of the United States, attacking critical race theory, but also gender theory, feminist theory, queer theory, etc. In Europe, we see similar attacks. In Central European University moved from Budapest to Vienna because of pressure by Viktor Orban. We see in Denmark how migration studies and gender studies are in attack. Also in Sweden, we see some signs of that. So criminalization of education and fugitivity or fugitive relationship to hostile education can be seen in other parts of the world as well. The country I come from, Iran, Baha'is, those people belonging to Baha'i religion, they have no right for higher education. So their higher education went underground. In Afghanistan, after the Taliban took over, women education went underground too. The hostile environment within academia have become harsher during the war in Palestine. And first meeting we had in this group at this university, 4 police officers came and stood outside the lecture hall in 2 hours. And other meetings, security guards came. And when we asked them why, they said, for security. Whose security? Who is the threat? What is the threat? And we know that from the critical security studies that security has been a colonial concept and practice, a tool for preserving the order, not justice, order, to secure colonizers' privileges. And another example was our colleague Ghassan Haj case, which was mentioned by Peter. During the war in Palestine, attack on education has become part of the war against Palestinians. Since October 2023, almost 400 schools in Gaza has been completely destroyed. 12 universities have been bombed and destroyed. 100 professors, my colleagues, have been killed. This is fugitiveness of education. Fugitivity is an act of resistance too, a desire of transgression and emancipation. And this is a space, this space we see today, we are here right now, is a space of solidarity, is a space of fugitivity, because I don't know if the police officers are waiting outside or not. They have been here before, yeah? For the first time in my time at this university since 1991, I saw police officers coming to a lecture hall. And it was for question about Palestine. These spaces of solidarity are what Fred Moten called the undercommons, a space of practice of epistemic refusal. This is epistemic of refusal, which means also not learning, but also unlearning. And learning is epistemologically reflection over the colonial legacies of knowledge production. This is an act of epistemic disobedience, an act of delinking oneself from epistemology, which is against oneself. Delinking from methodology and theories, which are against oneself. And this is going back to our Lord, who said, we need another tool because the master tool will never dismantle the master's house. And this is also part of the indigenous knowledge coming, written by anthropologist Audra Simpson about this decolonizing epistemology, which we can discuss later on if you are interested. So Audrey Simpson, I just want to say that she emphasized on epistemic refusal, yeah, and refusal for her was not only negation, but refusal is also generating new knowledges, new practices. So how about the classroom? How about pedagogy in dark time in a classroom? And here is very much Paulo Freire, who is Brazilian philosopher, thinker in education. We should go back, yeah? and seeing pedagogy not only a technique of teaching. Classroom is not a place for exchange of commodified knowledge. It is a public sphere where citizenship is practiced. Citizenship is a skill which is most needed in dark times. Pedagogy is to teach how to protect and demand rights to have rights. Pedagogy is to bridge the gap between knowledge and education and everyday life. Citizenship is not a status, it is a skill. Citizenship is not a piece of paper, evidence saying you are a Swedish citizen. Citizenship is a struggle. It is not given and secured privilege. Citizenship is an act. Sometimes some citizens have to fight for every single day because of their race, religion, sexuality, gender, class. And crises reveal these kind of quasi-citizenship. And quasi-citizenship is a condition when citizenship rights are denied or rejected because of class, race, etc. And also these crises showed us not only quasi-citizenship, but also quasi, how we can call it, quasi-humanity, maybe. The Jamaican philosopher Sylvia Wynter criticized the concept of human. According to her, concept of human coming from European Renaissance and European Enlightenment was never meant to include non-white people. So human refers to only white people. This is why human rights not working. This is why the human, all these human here, human there, all these laws, international here, international there, They are not working for Palestinians because Palestinians have never been meant to be included in humanity from beginning. Or indigenous people, or Black, or Muslim, or Afghans. Yeah? So this quasi-humanity, this quasi-citizenship, this is what should be addressed in our pedagogy. Pedagogy is never neutral. It is part of mechanism that decide what knowledge is produced and how students are formed. Pedagogy is a tool to make visible how knowledge is related to power. How do we know what we know? How do we know it? How knowledge is produced? For whom do we produce knowledge? What do we think we know? And this is going back to Hannah Arendt. Inspired by Kant, Immanuel Kant, dividing between thinking and knowing. And what we should not do, a critical fugitive pedagogy, is promoting thinking, not knowing. A pedagogy should not be, as Paulo Freire said, banking. You just give a lot of information and references to students. What we should do instead is promoting thinking, is promoting thoughtfulness. It's promoting a constant self-reflexivity, a constant dialogue with oneself, or as Bell Hooks said, put it, self-interrogation. For whom do I produce knowledge? Why do I produce knowledge? And this is very much, and just a few minutes more. Just as we know, a danger against critical pedagogy is commodification of education. I am told that I have to educate my students to become employable. I never would do that. This is not my job. My job is to educate my students to good anthropology, to make them to become a good anthropologist. And if they gain a good education, that would lead to job. I refuse to commodify education. I refuse, because if I try to turn my students into employable, I fail in both. I fail in making them a good anthropologist. I fail in to make them having a job, because I'm not the agency of employment. Yeah, I'm a teacher in anthropology. And here we come to the concept of Bildung, in German about Bildning in Swedish, which means not only education, but also formation. Yeah, so this is what Bell Hooks talks about, self-actualization, formation of the self through pedagogy in the classroom. Because according to Bell Hooks, the classroom remains the most radical space of possibility in the academia. And education and classroom is always future-oriented, because I teach a generation which comes after me, younger. They are younger than me. So it's about future. And when we talk about future, we speak about hope. Hope is what we need in hopeless situations. Yeah? Ernest Bloch, German philosopher, thought about future in terms of not yet. The not yet is the future that exists in the present. Future is not coming, you know, is something long away from us. Future is exactly here. Future is what we do exactly now. The present is already forming the future. So this is why thinking about future is very realistic. And when we think about future, we think about hope. Gramsci recognized that every crisis is also a moment of reconstruction. Because you know that the etymology of crisis means, I think it's Latin or Greek, I don't know. It means a very turning point in a disease when you die, either die or survive. Yeah, and that moment, you know, it's very important which direction you go. Yeah, so every crisis means also moment of reconstruction. Is crisis is not only about destruction but also reconstruction. Knowledge production in this moment of crisis between death and life, knowledge production is about promoting of life, to defend life against death. What otherwise knowledge means? Why do we produce knowledge for? If not for life, if not for promoting a language of life against the language of against one language of death, to foster hope against hopelessness, to teach commitment to a future of coexistence against racial, cultural, and religious fundamentalism. And for that, we need courage. Fugitivity requires courage. The ancient Greek term for courage, you know, the ancient Greek term parisia, means to speak freely, to speak the truth despite dangers, to speak honestly, and to speak freely, even if it might mean risk for you. And against that, we have fear. Fear followed by indifference. And from Arendt to Gramsci, they wrote against indifference and how indifference is dangerous because indifference is not a failure of individual failure, but it is a failure of the public. Indifference is abandonment of the public sphere. It is abandonment of the public, abandonment of the common. Of course, here Edward Said is also very important in his idea about the role of intellectuals and how they should intervene in the public debate. And so I talked about courage. So let me finish to say something also about imagination. And before that, let me also say this abandonment of life, abandonment of people is what also Hannah Arendt wrote about when NASA sent its first, mission to the moon, and she wrote, "This moment, abandonment of the earth, means that human beings have been turned from the subject of the earth to the object of the earth, and what is lost is the love of the world." Yeah, amor mundi, love of the world, the engagement with the world. Yeah, lack of engagement with the world means indifference. Yeah. To respond to the world is the core of what we see as human condition. Fugitivity is the heart of blackness, as Fred Moulton writes. It is also a heart of being woman in Afghanistan, being indigenous person in colonized land, being a Baha'i or political dissident in Iran, being a refugee or undocumented migrant in Europe, and being a Palestinian everywhere in the world. Fugitivity is about cultivating radical imagination. And when I say radical, I don't mean going and doing revolution. Radical means in Latin going to the root. Radical thinking is going to the root of problems and questions, and to seek the immanent contradiction within the racial capitalism and nation-state system, creating fugitivity as a response. Fugitivity as a response from inside, fugitivity as a reaction to injustices. Fugitivity of all these is evidence of failure of the oppressor to break the collective social will. It is evidence of failure of the oppressor to destroy their capacity to imagine a future otherwise. Let me finish with more interesting things, interesting words, poetic words. Robin Kelly, another Black American thinker in Freedom Dreams, writes about poetry and why poetry is important, because poetry transports us to another place, compel us to relieve horrors, and enable us to imagine a new society. Also, James Baldwin wrote about poetic thinking, not poetic thinking in terms of romantic or beauty, but poetic thinking in form of revolutionary, fugitive thinking. It is a poetic interaction based on a desire to be free. And when Rafat Al-Arir, my colleague from University of Gaza, who was killed in December 2023, when he was sitting in his home, when Israeli army approached, and the only thing he had to throw was his pen. That fugitivity I'm talking about. That poetic fugitivity that he wrote in one of his last poems, when before his home was bombed by Israeli army. Let me finish my talk with that poem. If I must die, you must live. To tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of clothes, to some strength, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, well, looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze and bid no one farewell, not even his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite, you made, flying up above, and thinks, for a moment, an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a tale. Thank you.
So much, and thank you all. I've always, I think a lot about poetry these days, and it struck me that one of the things that I noticed on social media and the sort of people I was in touch with in Palestine is that they started writing poetry to each other. That I felt that it was the only thing one could write. For me, I've always thought of poetry as being not merely the transportation, that which transports you to another place, but that which makes of many places one place, makes of many worlds one world. And there's, I don't think I know anyone, certainly in Sweden, who does that better than you, Shahram. So thank you very much. We're just going to open it up for question now. Questions for Shahram's comments. I'm going to pass this mic around, so just put your hands up and we'll bring it to you.
I just want to say thank you. That makes meditation.
Thank you. Otherwise, I can't keep talking. I'm a teacher. I can't talk in 3 hours.
We're going to see you talking about fish. We don't want you to finish it. Yeah.
Maybe I can ask you a question.
Yeah.
Det är möjligt att sänka. I think micken.
Jag vet inte.
To lower them up.
Do you know how to do it?
Possibly.
Yeah, I don't think I actually asked about this. It's not possible to modify that. So if you keep it at a distance like that, yeah.
Maybe just talk
Or just talk. Or just talk. Yeah. Yeah.
Can hear you.
Keep it away from the speakers.
Yeah. Okay. But I think you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks for the great talk. The question that I wanted to ask. So I'm also a teacher and an associate professor at QTH, and I've been giving courses for several years. And I wanted to ask you about the effectiveness of raising critical thinking at the higher, at the graduate level. For example, I'm talking about based on my experience. I'm giving courses in computer science, and in my courses, I try to raise questions regarding the operation of the computer science and technology, over the history on different genders or different races and so on. It looks interesting for the students, but at the end of the day, they can go back to the job market. And what the main concern is job market, although they found those topics important, but at the end, they ask me, okay, what's the best way to go to the market? So then my question that as long as the students have been studied during the high school or at the primary school, following the banking approach, so then raising these questions at the university or that, how effective you think they would be?
Yes, thank you. Of course, yeah. That's what we face. Yeah, that's a product of a long-term, neoliberalization of education, starting from kindergarten to university. So it's not changing. I mean, a lecture or a course not changing that, but somewhere it should start. Yeah. So even if one single student takes something from that lecture, it's enough. Yeah. So you don't need to be worried that all 25 of your students are happy with that. But it starts something, somewhere in their mind, in their imagination. Hopefully they lead to something else. Yeah. So I think I agree with you, and I shared that experience with you. I mean, my field is different, so I don't have similar difficulties. But I think we should insist and be honest. This is what, to be responsible intellectually and politically honest to our students in first time. Yeah. And also the body of the students are changing. When I started at this university in 1991, sitting in this kind of, lecture room, among hundreds of students of anthropology, I and one more were from not outside Europe or outside Sweden. Today, it's completely different. So the body of the students is changing, the questions are different, the problems are different, the references are different, So this is important. Also, we also change, because our students are changing. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah. Good luck. Yeah.
One thing you said, like this changing up, like, idea of how they see the world and everything. What's the dangers? Are you telling this teacher that he still should maybe can change one student's mind? What's the dangers of? I guess everyone in this room feels like this is important, what's going on at the start times. But what's the dangers when there is a professor that is maybe right wing, and then he chooses to change the whole, the course the day before, and then he instead talks about these things. What's the dangers of that?
Yeah, that's why I emphasize in my talk that as I understand, after so many years, the goal of knowledge production is to promote life, to protect life. And if there is a professor which is promoting death and hate, that's not that I'm talking about. And of course, we should resist that. We should say, no, this is about life. We are here to protect life. We are here to promote life, to promote solidarity, to protect the earth, not the abandonment of the earth, not abandonment of the law. If Trump talks about love, it doesn't mean we should abandon love. If Swedish right-wing parties talk about care, it doesn't mean we should abandon care. No, we should defend love against Trump. We should defend care against racists.
I wonder kind of practically, when you are a teacher, you stand in front of the class, you have a topic that you have to talk about in the curriculum. How like practically do you avoid to just do this banking system? How do you make the students engage within what you're like allowed to do as a teacher?
How do I do that? My students. Yes. Okay, I answer your question soon.
I've been a student of Shahram, and it's not the first time I had this approach at all. Like in my bachelor, I had a couple, maybe more or less, of teachers that had more or less this approach. And I think one thing is for sure communicating the urgency that the topic has for you. And if you change the pedagogy, I think, I don't know, like if you change your mindset, it doesn't matter, we notice. And we are, I don't know, we are absorbing, and to answer to you too, we always will bring some pieces with us. Maybe they don't, maybe we don't think about them like right after, or maybe yes, but then I think during time, during life, some things maybe we can encounter and we can think, oh, this is exactly what it is. Or this is something I'm wrong. Like the creative power, the imagination, or the asking ourselves the right questions. I think these are just the things that you somehow observe. Of course, with the readings, I don't know, and with the seminars for me were very important. And he gave a lot of importance to seminars and had a lot of seminars. And we were discussing about, we were somehow putting ourselves in the lesson and in the debate. And so you're already practicing. It's kind of that what you see. Then of course, going on, maybe it's hard sometimes, but something remains consistent. And I think that's pretty.
Thank you.
What grade does she get, Shahram?
Yeah. Not yet.
Can I answer? I think one of the things that made Shahram's seminars and lectures more challenging is that, so one way this banking would work is that like you read the text that you were supposed to read very thoroughly, you present to the classroom, a question is asked, and you provide an answer that's like under the context of the class is correct. Shahram will always challenge that answer, even if it felt like it was the right answer. Like, yeah, I thought this text spoke to me about this or that, which is probably what the text actually talked about. And he would ask, what do you mean? And what is it? Or like, I don't know, like asking questions that are actually really hard to answer. I still remember, do you remember, Shahram, when you asked us, like, we were talking about borders, and we were talking about how you can see borders. You probably can, like, perceive them with your eyes. Maybe you can hear them, but, like, how does a border taste like? How does a border smell? How does a border, like, sound? And I don't know, that was I guess what I'm trying to say is that like making every answer part of a dialogue instead of accepting it as like a correct answer, even though given the context it might sound like one.
Thank you so much. Maybe I can also continue saying, you know, very important, going back to what I said, you know, to bell hooks, you know, self-interrogation. I ask every single day, after 27 years teaching, still I ask, why I'm doing this? For whom I'm doing this? And, you know, asking this question again and again is kind of, you know, guarantee for not banking, yeah, to that honesty and responsibility intellectually and politically in the classroom.
Up there in the corner.
I would like to thank you so much for this interesting perspective and picture. And I think perhaps since years before the Ukrainian war, before the war in Gaza, I think as a teacher, we question ourselves a lot. I mean, what is our role as a teacher? For example, should I, for example, if I would, I'm responsible teacher for communicating the sustainable, for the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which frankly, when I present them, I know that it's just political discourse. No one can buy these reports. It's only about perhaps feeling good, perhaps maintain order and power, whatever the reason is. As a teacher, I feel many times that, okay, what we are talking about. And what is my role in this particular moment? Should I reflect this in front of the students? I mean, these are only courses for consumption, or should I just keep silent and just say what every teacher would say? So these moments are so much, or many times are questioned. And relating the pedagogy to, like, you know, to the public sphere for fighting and for our citizenship, I think that's really explained well. It's about the right to demand rights, so it's not something that, okay, a lot of informations and literatures that perhaps some of the literature they communicate nothing perhaps. But I want to share this with you, because you relate pedagogy and the classroom with the public sphere concept. And I don't know if you heard about this or not, but Habermas who is a prominent German philosopher about his name so much really attached in our mind with the public sphere. Recently in November, he mentioned that never again principle must above all lead to German commitment to protecting Jewish life and Israeli life, etc.
Yeah.
And he added that the 7th October Hamas attack was justified was not justified in principle, and the bloodshed in Gaza to a genocide was beyond the boundary of acceptable. So what do you think about this?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for bringing up Habermas. You know, Habermas, it was not first time Habermas excluded non-Europeans from the history. When he wrote that famous classic work on the public sphere, the coffee shops in European cities, which were spaces of emergence of democracy, European democracy, when European people sitting drinking coffee, talking politics, he never talked about the coffee itself. When the coffee beans coming from the plantations in Caribbean of free labor, enslaved labor. So he completely excluded that from history of democracy. Exactly when he did in the November, when he talked about excluding Palestinians as unthinkable subjectivities, yeah? So this is not first time Habermas did. Habermas have been doing that all the time, but this is first time became very obvious. Going back to your first part of question, you know, I started, you know what, in this start time I said, Shahram, let's think this way, that this is the last time you teach. How do you want to teach? This is the last, after that you die. Yeah, this is the last chance you form your education. And I started that course with telling my student about my fears. I opened myself. I told them about my fears. I wrote for them that I suffer from windophobia. You know, when it's windy, I cannot sleep. I get worried. I have to go hide myself in the basement somewhere, you know. And, you know, this way, I don't pretend I know things. I don't pretend I have answers. I don't pretend I'm not fearless, yeah? I share with them my vulnerability so they can do that too with me, yeah? So this is also part of the first part of your, and the last thing I want to say, you know, the first time I was given a course to teach, I was first year PhD student, and my department had no teacher, you know, and the course was to start in a few weeks. And I said, I take that course only under one condition, and if I include one fiction. The director of studies resisted. I said, no, should be social sciences. I said, okay, I don't do that. And she said, okay, give it. And I included a fiction by Hanif Qureshi, Pakistani British writer, Buddha of Suburbia. 25 years after that course, when I see my students on streets, they don't remember a word of my lectures. They don't remember anything of other anthropologists they read a text about. The only thing they remember is Hanif Qureshi's, you know, fiction. That story is still stay with them. So maybe we should, you know, we don't have time for that, but storytelling, yeah.
Can I just very quickly, you've had your hand up for a while. Would you ask a question?
Yeah.
And then we'll go to Zoom.
I was wondering, I don't know. Okay, so I understand that there is a focus on what's the so-called higher education here. when in this talk, but I'm thinking a lot of people would walk into a healthy classroom like yours, for example, and it would be a shock. It's too absurd. It's too out of the norm of what is taught, like, or how a teacher acts. A teacher should know. A teacher is supposed to tell me what to know. That's why I'm here, because that's what we get indoctrinated already in school all those years before we get to the so-called higher education. And many would leave a healthy kind of classroom like yours, for example, that like come in and it's just too weird, it's too big, it's too intense. And so they go back to a classroom that might work for them. And that's what I'm thinking. How can it be less scary for those who might not be very open-minded to, or not even used to critical thinking? I'm thinking a lot of people are not introduced to that at school.
Yeah.
It's actually non-existent a lot of times. And it's unimaginable for a lot of people. And the problem, I think, is a lot of people ditch what I feel is a healthy classroom. And how can we appeal to that? That is what I feel is very important.
Of course.
And how also we can use that knowledge, the one you're getting here today from you, actually like outside of academia as well, because it's not just, well, literacy is not just within academia now, is it?
Yeah.
So, and thank you so much for bringing up poetry and also storytelling, because sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. No, I think the answer to your question is bell hooks. I mean, she better than anyone else wrote about importance of pedagogy and how to democratize pedagogy. You know,
teacher thinks that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, especially her book from 1994. You know, teaching for transgression. Yeah, pedagogy for transgression. Sometimes, yeah, that's amazing work. Yeah, I think this is part. I mean, your question is part of this decolonizing, you know, academia, which is very broader and important question.
But we need to reach to those teachers within before, and the pedagogy is just not pedagogy.
Yeah.
So oh yeah.
Thank you.
Question, yes, the question too. And can you please repeat the question? Is if they are very high up, so people can hear it on Zoom?
Sure.
Thank you. It says, thank you very much for this lecture, Shahram. Something I have noticed in people, their question of Palestine is fear, hopelessness, apathy, and indifference. Do you have any suggestions on how to encourage people to overcome these things? I am at a loss.
Did you hear the question? Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe repeat it. No. Actually, in front of the. Does the mic pick you up, Joaquin?
I think so.
Yeah. So yeah, the question is about courage. The question is about fear. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know what, you know, how we can fight against fear, how we can, you know, fear is everywhere. Fear is every day with us, you know. Fear is every single, when I came here, I was thinking, what is the consequences of only mentioning Palestine means something you have to pay for in this country. Yeah. Or in Europe. I mean, Germany is the worst case, but also Sweden. Yeah. So how we can do that? I don't know. I mean, I don't how how we can struggle. Help me, please. You want to say something?
I have been here for a long time, and I don't feel the same way, like in the sense of this fear. I think that people, they were more courageous before to speak out.
Yes.
And I cannot understand this kind of like decline of during the last, I would say, 15 years or so, the decline of this political activism, or like, you know, that you want to speak out, except that with the shift in the politics, like in Europe and Sweden, everywhere, it's like this right politics. But yeah, it's even in Sweden, even if we compare in Sweden, there has been like some sort of also, I would say, decline in political freedom. We're talking about here the police. The same was faced also by the students, that they had walked out in Chalmers, and then they
yes. Yes.
revised the regulations. The same also at KTH.
Yes.
And it's not only about Palestine. I do remember also that we have debate at KTH about Corona and COVID. And we were
so COVID and Palestine, right?
You know, in general, I would say it's not only about the down to speak loudly about Palestine, but also to speak out about other things as well.
No, I think that was very telling example you gave. You know, police came because of COVID. Police came again because of Palestine. So how the well-being of society is supposed to be threatened by virus and also by Palestine question. Yeah, so to answer that question from Zoom, I want to also say, after 30 years at this university, this is first time ever I see a student movement. And this is hopeful. This is the best sign I have seen, that the first time students at this university are active outside the classroom, organizing conversation, which is not about their education, commodified education, which is about something else. So this is how people fight against fear. They get together. This is the undercommon, yeah? The biopolitics from below, as Ranabir Samadar, the Indian historian, put it, yeah? The act of protecting life together.
I want to say something just as a comment, because it relates back to some of the things we've been talking about in the teaching series before. One of the things we've talked about is precisely this politics of fear. And we will try to foreground that, you know, that when we talk about racism in Sweden, which was not supposed to exist in Sweden, but we talk about racism in Sweden, the politics of racism is not a politics of fostering hate as such necessarily. It is of cultivating fear. It is of telling people that they should be afraid over and over again, right? When Jomshof, the ideologue of the Swedish Democrats, he says, I am afraid of Islam. Not I hate Islam, I am afraid of Islam, right? And he gives license to everyone who should feel afraid of Islam, right? Fear is the language of racism. And of course, we know the political trend. We know the growth of this party and this way of thinking in Sweden. And I think that must be connected to your feeling that there are certain things one cannot question.
This is Martin Luther King, you know, order but not justice. Yeah, this is they are asking for order and sacrifice justice.
And whose fear, right? It's never about. No one talks about the Palestinian fear or the racialized person's fear or the Muslim's fear, right? It is the white normative whoever fear that we should always invest in, right, and be worried about. And the other thing I just wanted to say also, we've talked about, we had a sort of a seminar on the question of the figure of the terrorist, right? And the prominence of that term in not only in debates around Palestine, but in fact, we see all the more in any debate surrounding political activism, right? Including environmental activism, right? The figure and the fact that Greta Thunberg is then being painted as a crypto-Nazi because she participates in a Palestine demonstration, right? Tells you the kind of the creepy, you know, sort of insidiousness of this term and the way it shuts down all thinking and all thought.
because its sole function as a term, right? Historically, if you look at it, and this is what we kind of talked about in a previous lecture, it is precisely to foreclose the possibility of relationality, of thinking with, of asking, why is this happening? Well, it's terrorism. We cannot relate to it. And if you cannot relate to Palestinians as people who are in struggle, then there is nothing left really to relate to actually, but as some sort of object of sympathy, as victims and so forth, right? And that's been a very dramatic shift in Sweden from the 70s, when we had solidarity with third world liberation movements all around the world, not only in Palestine. Sorry, Isa. Okay.
Thank you. I agree with you. I think shut people down. I think
You repeated that.
you really shut people and discussions down. And I think the medicine is what your students already told us, that to ask a question back, like, what are you afraid of? And like, maybe if that's something that you can deal with, maybe it's time to be brave. Time to be brave for someone else.
Thank you. Yes, agree.
Much for the presentation and the discussion. I have a question in terms of the difference between the intellectuals here in Sweden, who maybe has this kind of healthy and democratic environment of speech in comparison to the intellectuals and the academics in Israel.
Intellectuals
And the academics in Israel. I mean, I know that some of the academics, especially in the field of anthropology, is really against the government of Israel, what the government of Israel did to Palestine. And they want to stand out for the Palestinian people. But I guess there's a hard censorship in Israel within the domestic environment. And I mean, what I am thinking is what kind of things and what kind of actions they will, like, it's the most suitable for them to teach in their classroom to their students. Like people, the ordinary people in Israel also need to know what's happening, what the government is doing for their neighbors. And I think it's also more ultimate for them to know and to be educated compared to maybe like us sitting here. They are the most like the subject of the actions to make the things change. Yeah, so I was wondering to think about the difference. And you also mentioned about the abandonment to the earth, like the quote from Arendt. So if the lost result for these academics in Israel is to abandon their home country, to seek like some other resolve or some other protections outside like Israel to protect their kind of attitude towards this war, how do you think, like, what will think about these actions? Will they be abandon their own people in Israel, or will it be considered as kind of a brave actions towards the maybe more broader justice to the people in Palestine and the future of the human beings?
I'm not expert in Israel, not even Palestine. But what I know that Israeli professors are not killed. 100 Palestinian professors, my colleague, have been killed since October. 4,200 students have been killed. No Israeli students have been killed. So teachers, 400 schools have been destroyed. Not Israeli schools have been destroyed. I have no answer to that question. I don't know if that was even a question. It was a speculation if Israelis have to do. I know that there are brave anthropologists in Israel who signed a letter in defense of Qasem Hajj. That's, I know. But I don't see any threats for that. They are not killed. They are not put in prison. They are not expelled. They are not, their home are not destroyed. Their children are not threatened. They are not suffering from hunger. They are not, exposed to displacement. They are still safe. So don't worry.
Just to briefly to your comment, we do have the case of, I've forgotten his name, but it has been in the news, an Israeli teacher, school teacher, who was in fact arrested because he posted on Facebook very simple language expressing concern for the humanity of Palestinians, simply asking what is going on. And he was arrested, and this became a national cause célèbre in Israel. You can all read about it if you will. And there are Israelis who have spoken out. And one of the ironies of following what is happening, not only in the Swedish media, but reading other media, is that we know that even though the Israeli media does function indeed as a propaganda arm of the Israeli government, as Gideon Levy, journalist in the Haaretz, has said, he does write for the Haaretz. He writes for an Israeli paper, and they publish him. And the sad thing is that they still nonetheless remain, insofar as they publish him and other critical voices, they are more critical than Dagens Nyheter. They are more critical than the mainstream media in Sweden, which has been absolutely atrocious, who are continuously, not only, I think, they're not even saying what the Israeli government is saying, because that would be quite shocking, in fact, if you were to sort of transmit that directly. They're laundering it. They're sort of, putting a soft edge to it in all kinds of ways, so as not to alarm Swedish publics.
Just add a comment on the academia. I also don't claim to speak for any Israeli academics, professors, student, and I've also, like you say, we have seen cases where professors or scholars in different ways trying to speak out, or Israeli citizens trying to speak out, are excluded or being fired, or maybe other people, some may have been exiled. I don't know if it's due, but Ilan Pape is one of those that I don't know. I can't say to exactly what extent. But we also see Israeli academia as a sort of, if we see them as institutions or something, are also, or can be argued to be the central mechanism in the oppression of Palestinians. If we see in concrete ways working very, very close hand in hand with the military, but we can see in almost any fields, in social sciences, in natural sciences, where it's the sort of, even either if it's sort of strategizing how to divide population, demographic issues, so leading to concrete strategies, such as the bombing of people in Gaza or the besiege of Gaza, but it's also sort of legitimizing these practices and sort of the practices of colonization and legitimizing the Zionist project. So I think that it's also good to see. I think all of us would love to see, especially very critical pedagogy in Israeli academia, of course, academia in the world, but I can't claim to be an expert.
We know a number of Norwegian universities, the most proximate neighbors, have ended, cooperation agreements with Israeli universities who are complicit in the Israeli government's policy. Again, I mean, that I think, and I think that's something we would like to see happen in every country in the world, if possible. That, this should not be possible to be complicit in not only genocide, which is transparent now, but apartheid, right? A system that has been a colonial system of oppression that is now more than half a century old. Do you want to ask a question from me?
I think there's one on Zoom.
It's a Zoom.
So they ask Shahram if you could speak more about courage and action as integral to fugitive pedagogy, and how anthropologists avoid become complicit. Yeah, complicit, I think, or assume fugitive pedagogy is merely about cultural critique. How they assume that fugitive pedagogy is merely about cultural critique.
Yeah, yeah, I think critical pedagogy as I said, it's related to everyday life. Yeah. So how we can bridge the gap between, which has been growing between, you know, academia and everyday life. Yeah. So how to address the questions, the problems that our students deal with. Yeah. It can be sexism, it can be racism, it can be this or that form of discriminations, poverty, segregation, how we can, this is how we should, you know, engage with the world. Yeah, to be engaged in the world with the world means to try to answer this question, which is the reality of our students. Yeah, and you know, if we pretend that these things are not happening, if we pretend that the war is not going on in Palestine, in our teachings, in our research seminars, then we are contributing to you know, the gap between academia and everyday life. And students, they see that. Students, they feel that. Yeah, they coming from the street, from the society to academia, and suddenly it's silence. Yeah, about Palestine. So they are confused. Why we don't talk about that? Yeah. So I think it's not only about politics. It's very much about academia. It's very much about, to be honest, to our university, to our students. Yeah, and academia, to include these questions. Yeah. This is why I also started with saying my responsibility is not to reproduce what states say. This is, a state has its own apparatus to produce knowledge. My duty is to produce another knowledge. And this is why I'm paid for. Otherwise, you know, a state has its very good knowledge production itself. So I think the courage is coming from history. This is why I try, maybe, I don't know, maybe this is why I try, you know, linking different forms of fugitivities, yeah, from slavery time to the current time, from Afghanistan to Sweden to Iran, to see that kind of fugitivity has different forms, and is not only one group or two, but it's a huge number of people are engaged in this kind of fugitivity, and perhaps that gives courage that we are not alone. Yeah, that struggle, that fugitivity have been going on for a long time, and we are just part of a broader and a longer history.
Yeah. Another Zoom question. I also love how Shahram incorporates arts in his work. I wonder whatever he considers arts as a tool in academia, or how, in other words, why academia doesn't allow and encourage the use of artistic tools. Is it because that might constitute a threat to the establishment institution that academia is? Did you understand?
Yeah, more or less. It's yeah, I think art or not art or everything, yeah, we do is about imagination. Pedagogy is about fostering imagination, is about helping students to be creative, to find their own language, to create their own knowledge. So imagination is important, yeah, and art is part of this, you know, strategy to encourage and promote imagination. Imagination is important because imagination is about politics. Politics is about the struggle over imagination. Politics is about how one dominant group force tries to control our imagination. Imagine this way. Imagine you as Swedes. Imagine you as Muslim. Imagine you as this or that. Yeah. So how we can imagine otherwise? Yeah. Imagination is important, and how we can help our students to be better in imagining differently, imagining otherwise, a kind of de-national imagination, a kind of de-bordered imagination. And I think art is important here because art gives perhaps an opportunity for encountering these questions more better than anthropology or sociology or you know, history. Yeah.
You think art is a threat, as they said?
Yeah, of course. I mean, art is, depends on which art, I mean, we are talking about. I mean, if we think about the art we talk about, of course, art is dangerous for the oppressor, for dictators, because they reveal, you know, the mechanism of segregation and divisions and partitioning. So of course, artists are put in, poets are, you know, the country I come from, Iran, artists are poets, they die either in exile or in prisons. It says something that art and poetry are much more than sociology, much more than anthropology, are dangerous to the power, to the authorities. Yeah. So more poets and artists are in prison and exile than sociologists or historians around. So this says something about maybe
the fact that sociologists are not in jail is a deep injustice. Apologies. Shahram, I have a question.
Sure.
How Freire talks a lot, you know, about praxis. This is very important. And we've, in a previous teaching, you know, I talked a little bit about how we might, and it was a speculation, it was really a question, how we might think about the relationship between feeling and doing, and how that works really in an activist context, right? Yeah, and because I don't actually also then want to separate feeling from thinking, you know, which is one of the things we like to think about in anthropology. So I wondered if you have any thoughts, because you also you've been active in all kinds of ways, right? Participating in demonstrations, and I wondered if you had any reflections on the question of the relationship between praxis and pedagogy.
Yeah, you know, in Farsi, there is a word, I think it's coming from Arabic, hayran. In Arabic, I think hayran means, you know, and hayran means confusion. Hayran means excitement, you know, means the way I know from Farsi. I'm sure it's different in Arabic, but how we use it in Farsi, is a situation when you are full of fear, excitement, and also confusion. You are interested, yeah? So for me, knowledge is starting from there. Knowledge starts from that hayran. The moment that you are confused, you are interested, you are surprised, but you want to know more. So of course, thinking starts with emotions. And this is the best documented by Black feminists, yeah, like bell hooks, like Audre, you know, they talk about, you know, how anger is important. No, anger is not hate. Anger is a way to change something, yeah? So how we can turn anger, how we can turn fear into thinking. This is, you know, this is important because when, for example, we watch news, yeah, we are seeing dying refugees in Mediterranean Sea, and we, you know, we get sad, we start maybe crying, yeah? But that sadness will disappear after 10 minutes. Yeah? So it's important to turn that sadness, that anger, that fear into an action, into a thought. Otherwise, it's lost. Yeah. So of course, emotions are important, but they should be, as you said, to turn it into action. Yeah. How we can get together and turn our anger, our disappointment, our fears into a theory, how we can theorize from our anger, how we can produce theories and methodologies from our angers, fears, you know, sadness. So I think, you know, emotions are important, and it is important also not hiding our emotions. You know, once I cried in my classroom many years ago because one student said something, and I could not stop my tears. And first I was ashamed for that, but then I said, no, this is part of pedagogy. This is part of education. How can I just censor my emotions? Because this is emotions, that sadness was part of that questions we were dealing with. Yeah. So yes.
I'd like to say something regarding your question about art. Yeah, so in data science and computer science, so we have lots of visualization and so on. One of the reasons that many researchers say that we should get rid of the art as much as possible and try to show the visualization using minimized approaches. And they, you know, the reason behind that was that so we should leave it to the audience and visitors to get or to extract the knowledge from the book. But this is their idea. But there are lots of kind of debate and movement from the data approach that they say that we should include emotion, but into the chart or visualization that, yeah, for example, especially when we talk about the humanity, so you can show, for example, if you talk about the people who died in war, you can show them using the bar chart. That's one way to show. So these are the number of the people who are killed every day. Another approach to say each person has a single dot and show that that dot drops, and that dot is a person who has been living, has some love, who was working, and people like that. But in technical approaches or in technical and academic people, they try to get rid of this emotional thing, but there are lots of movements for trying to be against.
Yeah, this is part of this fictional idea of objectivity, that if there is an objective real truth outside that which is separated from emotions, you know, histories and everything else. Yeah. So this is part of, you know, this decolonizing knowledge production, how we should open up for other knowledges produced outside universities, you know. I usually, I think also in this poster for this talk, I always introduce myself as accidental professor, because actually, in fact, I ended up in academia accidentally, and accidentally I became a professor, very much so. And part of, you know, this is part of the project of decolonizing and acknowledging that more knowledge coming from outside academia, And following Black feminists, the first person I turned to is my mother and grandmother to learn what have been lost in this colonized education system.
Yeah, I would like to follow up on the issue of the practice, the feeling, and the emotions, and to act on your feelings is also, it needs to be inhabited in a way. It needs to be practiced, and in terms of fear, to react to that fear, you need to practice to go against it. And like most of us bear some kind of privilege. Like I'm white, I'm a woman,
That's a privilege.
Okay. Well,
just checking this.
Well, I could be something else. Yeah. So I can use my privilege to support someone else. That doesn't require as much of me as for that person to stand up and fight against that injustice that that person is subjected to. As a man, I feel that you are obliged to stand up for the people that are not men. And that's your responsibility. My responsibility is to stand up against people that are the injustice that's made against persons. We don't have the same position as I have. To use my privilege, and that is an act you have to practice because it is scary. It's really scary. It's hard to raise your voice and it's hard to stand up against something, but if you do it, even if it's the smallest amount, you just say, no, that I don't like what you said now. Can you explain that? Or can you, well, you answer with a question. That builds up a little bit of courage. And next time, maybe you can go a bit further and a bit further. So in this setting or in this common sphere or society that we live in now, everyone is so afraid of everything, and we need to create a common feeling that someone will stand up for me if I'm in trouble or and you can only do that by starting with yourself.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's a skill. Yeah, citizenship is a skill. Yeah. I think this is also part of citizenship. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly what you said. Yeah. This is act of citizenship. Yes. So to stand for each other.
Yeah, it's not just gonna come through talking about it. No. It comes through practicing.
Exactly. Thank you.
I want to say something to that as well. And I you know, when we talk about doing something with your feeling, you know, there are different ways of thinking what an act is. And there's a whole, in fact, you know, there's a whole, you can think philosophically about this in a very broad sense. And one of the persuasive ways for me to think about what an act is, because there are many things that we do that are in some sense, they're happenings that don't really happen. In some sense, they're routine, they're events that are uneventful, right? And a real action, a real doing for me is something that affects you, also in the sense of the term affect, right? And what that means is actually that it transforms you. Something is rewiring, right? You've done it and you're not the same person after you've done it. And I think that confronting that fear is precisely that, right? And so it's a question really of your capacity to do something is actually to become something, right? To have the courage to become something. Yeah. And what, you know, when you introduce yourself, of course, not only as an accidental professor, but also as a former taxi driver and an accidental professor, right? Yeah. So that you're someone who is becoming. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And also including knowledge during taxi driving, which is important.
Up there in the corner again. What's your name?
My name is Lina.
Lina.
Pick up about the knowledge issue. I also pick up about the issue for the living in front. What do we know? What do we know about Israel? What do we know about Palestine? What do we know about our environmental crisis or political crisis? I think even though that I don't like the term global citizen, I don't believe in that term, but we are, whether we like it or not, we are living in globalized world, connected by environmental things, by political things, all the military complex, for example, in USA, is involved so much with what is happening in Palestine, for example. So we cannot really deal with the reality without that we should be connected in some way. And as being said, you cannot move you cannot be neutral in a moving train, because you have to take an action. And we are, as you mentioned, perhaps we are around turning points in many things in our life. And the first thing to do, you have to educate yourself. It's your ethical responsibility to know what's going on, and not to take the information only from the mainstream media. I can tell you that the mainstream media is manipulated. So it's also to keep order. So you have to search for other sources. To get like to educate yourself and to get the picture that perhaps you believe in. And basically what you know about, perhaps you don't need to know so much about Palestine and Israel, because it's quite obvious, in fact, I would say. But the basic, we have the last colonial state in modern history. We know who are the colonizer and who are the colonized. We know who are the oppressed and who are the oppressors. We know that using water, electricity, cutting electricity and cutting water and putting people in starvation is war crimes. They are war crimes, not justified by any kind of reasoning. We know that, all of this, and no one can debate this because it's quite obvious. That's your ethical responsibility position, really.
Yeah.
It's your ethical position as a teacher, as a student, as a human being.
Yeah.
As someone living in this world.
I think, Hannah Arendt and Gramsci also wrote about, Hannah Arendt wrote about, the danger of fascism is lack of thinking, thoughtlessness. And Gramsci wrote about, the risk of fascism is indifference, yeah? When indifference enters, life vanishes, yeah? So indifference is not neutrality. Indifference exactly means you take a position, and that position means not taking part in the war. As you said, we are part of, the war.
We had some of you read, we had a massacre, I think it was in Gaza, in the south of Gaza City, not in the very south, at least 100 Palestinians were killed and over 700 wounded. And I think the count is rising. People who were waiting to receive flour, and they were shot at by the Israeli army, some crushed under Israeli army tanks. We know that the UN Special Rapporteur for the Right to Food has said that Israel is using hunger as a weapon of war, that this constitutes a situation of genocide. And we're still waiting for any fucking government to do anything about it here in Europe.
I mean, no one better than this Swedish minister said. Yeah. Ceasefire is injustice. I mean, this is the best way to talk about coloniality.
I think the term the Hannah Arendt uses is actually imagination, right? There's a lack of imagination that makes the fascists capable. And that's also what the term terrorist does. You cannot imagine that position. You simply cannot imagine yourself being there. So just forget about it, right? It's not even about thought, it's just imagine. Start thinking a little bit about what it means to live in Gaza now and how the fuck can you not feel it? Sorry. Next, hands up there, yes.
Yeah, I'll try to speak as loud as it's possible. I'm also Shahram's student, and I'm Ukrainian. I'm from Ukraine, and also Ukrainian who worked a lot with the Arab countries. So I'm kind somewhere in the middle. And something that I've been thinking about for a month is the way world is divided now. So, for example, as you said right now about colonized countries, so we know like Israel and we know Russia, actually, it's also a colonized country. It's still can't fall apart, unfortunately. Well, this is interesting that how we can see that men of power or countries of power, civilized countries, that they can see, and we can see, who are they on the same side with which country is on the same side with those men of power, and which country they afraid of, in a way. So basically, I've been analyzing a lot of what's going on, like what we know in Israel and in Russia and both like Ukraine and Palestine. And yeah, it's basically the same story, but Israel is on the same side, but Russia is someone they're afraid of. But if you take a look closer what's going on, it's ridiculous that we're talking about the same situation, but it's completely reversed. So also it's a lot about propaganda itself and what we, as you like to say, Shahram, what we include and what we exclude. What is our focus? And it's mostly like I'm thinking out loud and what your comments on it. But as an example, I watched this interview with a Palestinian, I believe it was an activist for Israel radio or something like this. And this is about focus. They keep saying, like, you Palestinians, you are reproducing yourself. There is a lot of you. If there would be genocide, then you would be like, there are not becoming like too many people. This is what they say, like propaganda. And he said, like, and now just, if you're educated enough, if you're smart enough, just for you to know that we're talking about forced migration to Palestine. Like, again, as Ukrainian, I know what it means, that under different circumstances, they force you to move because you can stay in your own country. And then they replace this space with those people which are loyal to the country, and they claim that, you see, those people are, yeah, they say nothing against. They're completely agreed with those who are in charge there. So it's also like, again, thinking out loud, but maybe you can comment to it. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, of course, you know, the question about demography has always been a colonial question, yeah? Always, you know, Europeans who have been worried about, you know, too many kids in Africa, yeah? Or you know, there is demographers in Sweden have obsession about migrants' fertility. So they have seminars after seminars, year after year, about so many kids are, you know, migrants, you know, giving birth to. You know, this obsession of migrants' fertility is very much linked to the obsession of colonizers about Africans, you know, fertility, and still that. So it's very much related to that interview at that radio program. And also is people are about lands, yeah? It's about, you know, regulating of population and also question of lands, which is very much obvious question in the conflict between Russia, you know, not the conflict, I'm sorry, the war in Ukraine, invasion of Ukraine by Russia and invasion of Palestine by Israel.
If I could also add something, you know, we had early in this teaching series, we had Andreas Malm come and speak to us. And he was in his formative, he's originally a Palestine activist before he became a climate activist, a climate scholar. And, you know, one of the points that he's tried to bring across in his writings is that, you know, it's now become commonplace in the media when we talk about the climate crisis or catastrophe, how we want to talk about it, to blame the growing population of the world, right? To talk about, of course, we know who's growing. It's the racialized people who are having too many kids, right? And of course, and his basic point is one that I think is very important to the marriage, is that the problem is not humanity, the problem is capitalism, right? There's capitalism destroying the world, not humanity. I also wanted to say about, you know, Ukraine, I think it's one of the, like you said, exactly, it's the same precisely two parallel situations, right? Which in the manner in which European governments have responded to it, expose their hypocrisy in all kinds of ways, right? But one of the tragedies of it is that also, in terms of how this is treated in the Swedish media, it's as if we're being told that you either have to care about one conflict or the other, right? It's you either care about Ukraine, or if you talk about Palestine, it's a distraction from what's really going on. And I think that's something we also have to refuse, right? It's part of understanding that many struggles are part of one struggle, but in fact we can care of both, right? And we need to think about both, and we need to think about how they articulate in different kinds of ways, right? I want to say with that we are coming close to the end of our time here, and we may need some time to also leave. So I want to thank Shahram. I want to thank students, Stockholm Academics for Palestine, for helping to organize this, and also Sweden, PhDs in Sweden for Palestine. We'll really welcome you here for the next teaching we're going to have. And on the topic of praxis, encourage you to come to the demonstrations that are happening in Stockholm every weekend for Palestine. Please join in. I promise you that you will be able to think and feel in new ways if you keep doing this over a long period of time. Ed, you have something to say?
Yeah, I would also like to say, if you want to be involved with Stockholm Academics for Palestine, then you can sign up for our newsletter, and tomorrow we will have an info table in booth D3 all day. You can come by, just have a chat and get some flyers, and you can sign up here to send you a newsletter.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Shahram.
Thank you.